Assad is out. This is the third Iranian proxy in so many months after Nasrallah and Sinwar. I'll have all the details about what's happening in Syria and what needs to happen now coming up on In Focus. I just want to take a look for a second at the outside of the show. Look at some of this footage, okay? Here is Assad's, I think Hafez al-Assad, that is Assad Pair, his statue coming down in Latakia, one of the most important strongholds of the Alawites, which I'll get to in a second. Just look at it coming down. Latakia, Assad. This, of course, reminds us of other statues that we've seen coming down in recent years. Here, back in 1991, what are we looking at here? Fall of Soviet Union. And the crowds are bringing down Lenin's statue. And then in 2003, here we see it, bringing down Saddam Hussein's statue, right? Every time you have a tyranny, it comes down and people are taking down the statues. It happens every time. And then what happens? And that's right. Then you get chaos. But let's get to that in a second. So what are we looking at here? I want to talk about three major developments that we're looking at in Syria, or major revelations that we've seen in this lightning overthrow of Bashar Assad that culminated with his complete ouster from power between Saturday night and Sunday morning. So the first one that I want to talk about is the Sykes-Picot agreements. Sykes-Picot were the British and the French colonialists, the people who were the architects of the modern Middle East at the end of World War I, as the Ottoman Empire, that is Turkish-controlled empire, was coming down at the end of this of the First World War in 1917. Sykes and Picot got together and they drew up maps of the nation states that were going to be formed in the ruins of the Ottoman Empire that had just collapsed. And the Syrian state, the Syrian Arab Republic, was one of the results of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. The state of Lebanon was another one. Iraq was another one. The British Mandate for the Land of Israel, otherwise known as Palestine, was a product of that time. Also, it encompassed both Israel and Jordan. And now we're looking at the utter destruction of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, because Sykes-Picot assumed that what would follow the destruction, the Ottoman Empire, the imperial control of this area of the Middle East, would be nation states or states that could be governed first as colonial protectorates under the League of Nations mandate system, and second, first, they would be governed as protectorates under the League of Nations mandate system, and then they would become, in short order, more or less, independent sovereign states. And it actually was interesting the way that they put it together, because the peoples who lived in these areas that had been governed by Turkey weren't nations. They were an agglomeration of tribes, of ethnicities, of religious, confessional communities, Christians, Kurds, Sunnis, Shiites, all of them ruled under the imperial rule of the Turks, under the imperial Ottoman rule for well nigh 400 years. And they had never been self-governing states. And so the idea that the British and the French put together is we're going to have them govern as states. But how do you take multi-ethnic, multi-confessional, in a way multinational, but certainly multi-tribal areas and turn them into states? Through repression. So they gave, for instance, in Syria, control over the country to a very small group of people, which are an offshoot of Shiite Islam called the Alawites. The Alawites made up always no more than 10, 11% of Syria's peoples, and they were given control over Syria. And here I just want to show you a map that Diaspora Affairs Ministers, my friend Amichai Shikli, put up on his Twitter feed today. This is the map, and basically the idea was you take 10% of the population of this new country called Syria, they're going to repress the other 90% in order to protect this oil pipeline that's going to go through from Iraq to Israel. to Haifa and then on to Europe. So the basic idea was that this was a transportation route for oil through to the West, and that the people who are going to be guardians of this oil pipeline are the Alawites. Now, this isn't a great idea. For the past week or so, since everybody was stunned by this rapid collapse of the Assad regime after, again, 54 years in power, under all of this Turkish-led uprising, which was headed by a Turkish-sponsored jihadist organization, which is an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, but I get ahead of myself, of course, as per usual. Everybody started showing this map. I want to show it to you now. So this map is what a post-state area of Syria would look like. And basically it's divided, as you can see, into a red area, a green area, and a yellow area. And each area connotes a different part of Syria. So the one in the south is basically a state of the Kurds and of the Druze. And then you have a state that's going to be along the coast, and that might be the Alawites under Russian protection, perhaps. And they may have Christians in them as well, because the Russians are going to want to protect the Christians. And the rest of it is in the middle is going to be the Sunnis. And they're going to be in charge, and that's going to be more or less under the sphere of influence of Turkey. And the idea here is that there is no longer any glue connecting Syria, because the Alawites were keeping it all together through repression of everybody. And now that the Alawites are out of power, the whole thing that was put together in 1916 by Sykes and Picot is just disintegrating before our eyes. And any notion that Syria can continue to be a unitary state is just crazy. It's just trying to put together Humpty Dumpty long after he fell off the wall. And all the king's horses and all the king's men can't put it back together again, and neither should commentators on CNN. So that's basically the idea. And Sykes-Picot, as I said, it delineated the borders of Syria, of Lebanon, of Iraq, and then of Israel, Jordan, which is one unitary landmass. And Lebanon was supposed to be a Christian-ruled area, and the Christians were supposed to essentially lord over the Shiites and the Sunnis, who were smaller populations. But what are you going to do? Because of terrorism, because of the civil war, most of the people who have left Lebanon over the past 4 decades have been the Christians, and now they're a minority. But they keep this sort of fake confessional-based distribution of power between the president, the prime minister, and the Speaker of the Parliament of Lebanon, as if nothing has changed. Everything is just sort of sealed in wax and has been since the 1940s in Lebanon. This isn't true, and that's why Hezbollah was able to open up and fill a power vacuum through terrorism, through extortion, and seize control of all of these institutions, turn them into empty husks that are led by these puppets, Christian, Sunni, that are all beholden to Iran through Hezbollah. And so now in the end of that, it's not at all clear what will become of the Lebanese state, but any idea that you're just going to put it back into this Sykes-Picot arrangement is crazy. And of course, Hezbollah still it's been decimated, but it certainly hasn't been destroyed yet. And so, but Lebanon is also likely going to disintegrate before our eyes, or very likely to disintegrate before our eyes. If it doesn't, it's because something came in to prevent that from happening, like French neocolonialist authorities, etc. So we'll have to see what happens there. And then you see in Iraq. So in Iraq, after the United States overthrew Saddam Hussein, they basically, again, took away the rationale for keeping Iraq a unitary state, because just as the British and French installed the Alawites to repress the rest of the population of Syria in order to enable or to ensure the economic interests of colonial powers for oil. So in Iraq, you had the British installing the Sunni minority over the Shiites, who were the majority, over the Kurds, who were a large minority, and all the Yazidis and the Christians, who until 2003 also lived inside of Saddam Hussein's repressive regime. But by repressing them, they were able to, both in Syria and in Iraq, sort of turn everybody against one another instead of against the regime. And obviously, one of the ways to do that was also to turn everybody against Israel and organize everybody around the principle of killing the Jews. And then they would be less angry at the regime. But whatever, it was always to divide and conquer, be good to this people at the expense of that people, repress all of these people when necessary, mass killing, etc. That was the way of the Middle East. That was the way due to the Sykes-Picot arrangements. That was in Iraq. So Saddam Hussein was a strong man who kept Iraq together through repression. The Assads were the strong men in Syria who kept everything together through repression. And they kept everything together with, starting in 2011, when the people started rising up against the regime as part of the so-called Arab Spring, they were able to maintain power with the support of Iran's army, which is Hezbollah, and Russia, that served as Hezbollah, Iran's air force, when they were committing genocide against the Sunnis of Syria and forcing massive displacement of people. They killed 500,000 in a genocide, and they pushed millions more out of Syria over the period of 6 or 7 years of the Syrian so-called civil war, which was really just a war of genocide by the regime against the majority of Syrians. So in the service of other imperialist regimes, Iran and Russia. Okay, so that was the end of Sykes-Picot. They were able, through repression, to remain in power for another 8 years or so. And the same, by the way, is true in Jordan. What is the Jordanian regime? Well, the Jordanian regime is the Hashemites. And who are the Hashemites? They are the tribe from Arabia that lost in the power struggle that went on also around World War I with the Sauds. So there were two clans of tribes in Arabia, the Hashemites and the Sauds, and they fought for primacy, for control over Arabia. The Sauds won, and the consolation prize that the British military gave to the losing side, the Hashemites, was control over became what is today Jordan, and they tried to install them as well in Syria. That didn't work. They were pushed out, and so they got Jordan as a consolation prize for losing Arabia to the Sauds. And so it could have been Hashemite Arabia, but instead it became Saudi Arabia because the Sauds beat the Hashemites, and the Hashemites took over Jordan. Jordan, of course, is a land that's populated by two different kinds of population groups. One are Bedouin tribes, Hashemites being one of them. There are others. There are two others, I think, major Bedouin tribes in the Kingdom of Jordan, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. And then the majority of people who live in Jordan are what we refer to as ethnic Palestinians. They were supposed to be the Arab state that was going to be founded to the side of the Jewish state, as determined by the League of Nations or by the British, and then accepted by the League of Nations on the eastern side of the Jordan River for the Arabs of the Palestine Mandate, whereas the state of Israel, the Jewish homeland, was supposed to be established on the western side of the Jordan River. So that was the idea of the Palestine Mandate. You got the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan instead of a Palestinian state because it was a consolation prize again. And over the past decade and a half, since the sort of the convulsions of the Arab world in the Arab Spring, you've had increased anger and revulsion at the Hashemites, who are considered corrupt by both the other Bedouin tribes and also by the Palestinians, and they become weaker. And King Abdallah II himself married Queen Rania, who is a Palestinian, to try to placate the Palestinians of Jordan and to prevent a Palestinian state from being established in Jordan, essentially by making himself their leader. And he is much reviled by the people of Jordan. And Iran, for one, has been trying to subvert Jordan for a long time. We got, I think I spoke about it last week, a massive shipment of sophisticated arms was captured along the Jordan Valley that was directed by Iranian operatives in Jordan to be transferred to Palestinian terrorists inside of Judea and Samaria to to strengthen, to escalate the Palestinian front in Judea and Samaria against Israel. So that was what we saw from Jordan, and Jordan is subverted by the Iranians. They're deterred by the Iranians. They're deterred by their own people. It's a very, very weak regime. And then you have the fact that what just happened in Syria will doubtless have repercussions for Jordan. I talked about this last week with my friend and colleague, the brilliant Dr. David Wormser, when we were discussing what the convulsions in Syria that hadn't yet led to the overthrow of the Assad regime, but it was fairly clear that they were moving in that direction, mean. And we pointed out that Julani, who is the head of the Hizbat al-Shams, I think is what it's called, which is the main organization that was responsible for the overthrow of the Assad regime. Who is he? He is an al-Qaeda terrorist, and he took over al-Qaeda in Iraq from Abu Musab Zarqawi, who established al-Qaeda in Iraq for Iran. I think we should point out Zarqawi was operating from Iran before he came into Iraq, and so and started or led the Sunni insurgency against the Americans and the British in that country. So Zarqawi was actually ethnic Palestinian, I think, and he's from northern Jordan. Zarqawi comes from the northern Jordanian town of Zarqa. That's why he's called Zarqawi. It's because he's from Zarqa. And Zarqa, then, because it's in northern Jordan, it's not far from Iraq. And so, Syria. And so we're looking at a situation where the rise of these forces that are Jordanian inside of Syria are going to have deleterious implications for the stability of the Hashemite regime inside of Jordan, almost certainly. Okay, so this is what we're looking at there. And I believe that Dave said in our conversation, but since I'm not sure, I'm just going to repeat it, that Julani is just an Arabic version of Golani. This isn't his original name. He adopted the name Julani or Golani as a signal of intentions of what he intends to do, which is attack Israel. Al-Shams is the Islamic name for Syria, and Shams itself includes not only Syria, the Syrian Arab Republic as we've known it, but also Lebanon and also Jordan and also Israel. So when he talks about independence or freedom for Shams, he's not only talking about Syria, he's talking about Lebanon, he's talking about Jordan, and from our perspective, most importantly, he's talking about Israel. So he is not a friend of Israel. To the contrary, and here I just want to show you a colleague of mine, Elchanan Groner, posted this today, which is what his organization posted after the October 7th invasion and slaughter by Hamas inside of Israel. And this is a statement by his organization praising Hamas for attacking Israel that day. So he is a successor of al-Qaeda. And also, I want to just point out here, there's been a lot of talk about, he's much more moderate than he was 10 years ago. This is not true. You can't be a half jihadi. You can't. You can't be half pregnant. You can't be half a jihadi. You're either a jihadi or you're not a jihadi. There's no moderate jihadi. We saw here. Let me just show you this clip of Erdogan. He's talking here. He's calling for the annihilation of Western civilization. Just let's watch a little clip of Erdogan here.
Batı'nın kan, gözyaşı, katliam, soykırım ve sömürüye dayanan ilerlemesi Doğu'nun ilahi ve insani medeniyetini boğmak için altını çizerek söylüyorum, geçici bir dönem üstünlüğü eline geçirmiştir. Gün gelecek, kutsalı ve insanı dışlayan ilerleme dönemlerinin parantezi er ya da geç kapanacak, Batı uygarlığı büyük bir gürültüyle çökerken sahip olduğumuz öz ve ruh ile bizim ilahi insani aşk medeniyetimiz hem de daha güçlü olarak Allah'ın izniyle tekrar inkişaf edecek, şaha kalkacaktır.
Erdogan views himself as the head of the Sunni Islamist axis, the Sunni jihadist axis. And what he's saying here is, I want to destroy Western civilization. And again, as David said last week in our program, which if you haven't watched, I really urge you to watch it, David Wormser explained that, he has been undermining Europe for the past many years through immigration of Turks into Germany and other countries throughout Western Europe and Central Europe. And then he uses this immigrant group in order to destabilize the societies of Europe. And now you see here that he says that what we really want to do is destroy Western civilization and replace it with an Islamic imperial empire, a neo-Ottoman empire, which I receive Erdogan as the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, as the head of the Sunni Islamist axis. I'm going to lead, I'm going to foment. And here is this successful operation in Syria. And the person who did it is a guy named Julani, who has his sights set on Israel. And he himself congratulated Hamas, another Muslim Brotherhood offshoot, like Al-Qaeda is. And he sees himself as part of or a prospective leader of al-Shams, which includes all of the area that was part of the Ottoman Empire, Syria, that's called the Levant, which includes Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and modern-day Jordan. We see modern-day Jordan is going to be very, very stressed by the breakup of Syria. And this brings us to Israel, I think. So let's talk about for a second what Israel has done over the past day or so since all of this has gone on. I think 2 days. I think we went into Shabbat on Friday with reports that Israel was bombing, our Air Force was bombing chemical weapons storage facilities in and around Damascus. And by last night, we got reports that the Air Force and this morning, that the Air Force had bombed 2 or 3 installations in Syria that were storage facilities for chemical weapons and for other advanced weapon systems, missiles, and I don't know what else, but sophisticated weapon systems, and particularly the chemical weapons that Israel destroyed at least 2 sites of these weapons today and yesterday and the day before. So that's one thing that Israel's been concentrating on, removing these armaments that can be used against Israel, or for that matter, the people of Syria, by the new rising leaders of Syria, which are these various terrorist armies, or this one specific terrorist army, which is Al-Qaeda. And so you take out the chemical stockpiles and the advanced weapons, and Israel set up a security zone in Quneitra. And here I just want to see, so Quneitra, if you recall, or if you don't recall, I'll tell you for the first time, Israel in 1967 took over the Golan Heights, including the city of Quneitra. Here, let's just show it on a map. And then in the disengagement agreements that the Americans mediated under the Ford administration in 1974, Israel agreed to leave the area of the city of Quneitra, and it was supposed to be a demilitarized zone that was manned by UN force called UNDOF, and they were in charge of overseeing the disengagement agreement between Israel and Syria. And Quneitra remained an abandoned city, and Israel is in control of the Golan Heights to the west of Quneitra. And on Saturday, the UN forces in Quneitra came under attack, and Israel protected them. And then Israel, by this morning, I woke up at around 6, and the report was that Israel had sent in infantry and armored forces into Quneitra, and that we've seized it as a security zone. Israel also set up roadblocks and declared a closed military zone, a lot of the border areas with Syria along the Golan Heights. And we're waiting, and we're seizing control of a buffer zone so that they can't get near Israel. And I think that obviously these are extremely important things to do. And I just want to give a couple of ideas about, where this should go, right? So if you go back for a second to the map that I showed earlier of Syria basically divided into 3 different areas. control. So statelets, if you want to call them, states, if you want to call them, tribal areas, whatever you want to call them. So the one in the south and going up to the Iraqi border is a statelet, or the successor state that would be controlled by the Kurds and the Druze. And the Druze in particular, in Jabal Druze, about 1 million Druze in Syria. And they live in much of the area that borders the Israeli Golan Heights. And here I just want to show you a picture. The Druze militia took over al-Suwaida, which is the major town in the Druze area in Syria. Here, I just want to show you the clip. So the northern Golan Heights has 4 Druze villages in it. And those Druze are aligned with relatives of the Druze of Syria. And it's very important for the Druze in Israel that the Druze in Syria be protected. That's one of the reasons why for many years the Druze of the northern Golan Heights refused to accept Israeli citizenship, because they were afraid that the Syrian regime was going to lash out against their relatives inside of Syria if they made any sort of if they made any sort of amends with Israel, if they accepted Israeli citizenship, or if they in any way accepted their role as members of Israeli society. So now, obviously, that regime is gone. And here's a question of how does Israel protect itself against uncertainty, obviously, and rising forces that are also hostile and dangerous, particularly al-Qaeda. And the answer here, I think, is not just everything that Israel did today is very important. Setting up a security zone in Quneitra is critical, and Israel should not be quick to leave that area at all. And once we're there, we should not give it up. The other thing is that, because UNDAF obviously is completely irrelevant because it was an agreement between a non-existent regime and Israel, so that it can't be enforced anymore. Israel has Israel is the natural ally of 3 different groups in Syria: the Kurds, the Druze, and the Christians, if they want. And that also goes to Lebanon and the Maronites there. But Israel should be reaching out to the Druze. They've already been asking for humanitarian assistance. I heard it on the radio on my way to Jerusalem to start taping this morning. They want medicines. We're in wintertime. Blankets for their kids. I mean, just basic things. And this should be a segue to discussions between Israel and the Druze about how Israel can provide assistance to the Druze. I think it's very important for Israel to be reaching out, because we are what precipitated the downfall of Assad in Syria. That's very obvious. None of this would have happened if Hezbollah hadn't been decimated in Lebanon. Everybody was afraid of Hezbollah. It was seen as the most powerful, veteran forces of the wars of Syria and Iraq and Afghanistan. And Israel was deterred by Hezbollah, and suddenly Israel decimated Hezbollah, right? There is no Nasrallah. Their command structure is gone. Most of their armaments are gone. So that was what empowered Turkey to give the green light to Giuliani to start the uprising against Assad that ended up being an empty shell, which we'll get to in a second, and they took over. So that wouldn't have happened without, everything that just happened in Syria happened because of what happened in Lebanon and Gaza. And that's it, a lot of Israeli commentators have been saying that Yahya Sinwar on October 7th thought he was going to change the Middle East, and he did. He destroyed much of the Iranian axis. It now stands in tatters, and all that we still have to do, as we talked about repeatedly on this show, is we have to attack Iran's nuclear installations, and that's sort of the coup de grace, and we have to do that, and we have to do that as quickly as possible. If Trump wants us to clean the tables before he gets in, on January 20th, fine, we should do it then. If we have the arms to do it after the arms embargo we've been suffering under with the Biden administration. But Iran's nukes have to go. And then the regime has to go. So here I think the point is, that we've been hedging our bets for a long time, working on what the safe move is. And now we have to think about what the big bets are, because everything is changing, and it's changing, as we saw in Syria, for instance, extremely quickly. The regime is responding to Israel's massive victories in Lebanon and in Gaza, and Israel has to capitalize on this. We have to capitalize on a rebuilt and perhaps stronger than ever posture as a regional power. We have to build on this. We have to move very, very quickly to capitalize on it with the Druze, with the Christians, with the Kurds in particular in Syria, with the Christians in Lebanon, in order to protect ourselves for the next, 3 generations. I mean, I think that's really what we have to be looking at now. Everything is in flux. Everything is moving. All the things that we knew, the Sykes-Picot arrangements in the Middle East, that's what we knew. They've all been destroyed. We have to look anew at our region. And that brings me to the second thing that I want to talk about, which is our blind generals who are trying to steer this bus against the wishes most of the time of Prime Minister Netanyahu, who definitely has his eyes open. This morning, one of the generals in the IDF and the Shin Bet and the Mossad's fanboys is this star journalist in Yediot Ahronot named Nadav Eyal. And Nadav Eyal put out this post on X where he said essentially that the Israeli military intelligence and the IDF and the Mossad totally missed what was happening in Syria, totally missed what was happening in Syria. They thought that the Assad regime was rebuilding its military force under the protection of Russia, and that the Russian military forces in Syria were the bulletproof vest of Assad, and that under their watchful gaze, he was able to rebuild his forces. And they were saying that Israel was, again, supposed to cut a deal with Assad, that he would work with Israel instead of Iran, and he would be a stabilizing force. That was Israel's position up to a week ago when everything fell apart. They totally missed everything that was happening. And I have to say, as somebody who paid absolutely, I would think, zero attention to Syria since at least October 7th, 2023, when you look in hindsight at the situation in Syria, you realize that people whose job it was actually to look at Syria, even during the war in Gaza and in Lebanon, that they really are blind when you think about it. Because here is Assad. He committed a genocide of the Sunnis, which is a majority of Syrians. He killed 500,000 of them. I think 6 million people were pushed out of Syria. It's a country with 23 million people now. Okay? He pushed them out, caused a worldwide refugee crisis. He overburdened Jordan and Turkey and France and everybody else in Europe with his refugee flow that he caused because he was committing an ethnic cleansing of biblical proportions and a massive genocide of his political opponents, which are just the Syrian people, as the leader of a tiny splinter group that comprises about 10% of the entire population of Syria. That's what Assad did, right? And then they were repressed by genocide, right? They wanted to overthrow him. They were repressed through genocide and dispersal by Russia and by Iran, and particularly Iran. So Russia's been busy for the past 2 years in Ukraine, and they're watching Iran be just pulverized, all of its proxy forces destroyed, and Iran essentially has no army, right? It's all Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, everybody else. So they're watching this happening. And if somebody had actually been paying attention to Syria and thinking about the mindset of a Syrian, that is, of a Sunni in Syria, of a Kurd in Syria, right? They would be thinking that what motivates these people, they would know that what motivates these people is not going along to get along, and what we really need is humanitarian relief or whatever, which of course they didn't get from Assad. It's vengeance. It's revenge. It's what's it called? It's a word in Hebrew. It's like you have to pay the blood debt, all right? And that's what they're thinking about. And they're nursing this. And they're whispering to their kids about this. And this is what they know. We saw it, obviously with Hamas in Gaza, right? How much they hate Israel. This is how much the people hate Assad. So the idea that he was stable, or he could ever be stable after what he did to his own people, is as smart as the idea that Israel can deter Hamas by giving them by getting Qatar to pay them in cash and to give them work permits in Israel, and you keep them fat and happy, and then they're deterred and they're not going to attack us, even though their ideology is jihad and genocide of Jews. And even though, same thing in Syria, even though these people have watched their entire tribes or Hamulas, clans be annihilated by Assad, and they're sitting there, they're just going to accept, going back to normal? Of course not. Of course not. And so when you look at Gaza, which they missed, Lebanon, which they missed, Syria, which they missed the revolution in Egypt in 2012 and 2013 as well. You have to start asking some questions. First of all, what else are they missing? But second, why are they so wrong? And that goes to something that another fangirl of the general staff said this morning, Daphne Liel from Channel 12. She's their political commentator, but she takes stenography. She takes dictation from whomever she's listening to. And so she said this morning, well, we really need, this can be good in Syria because it'll make it more difficult for Hezbollah to rebuild its arsenal. Oh, the third thing that Israel actually did. So Israel destroyed the stockpiles of chemical weapons and advanced weapons, and Israel instituted its buffer zone in Quneitra. And then finally, Israel apparently pulverized the border crossings between Syria and Lebanon to block Hezbollah's resupply. So Israel actually took 3 concrete steps that were all very important. She said, because Israel did that, now the ceasefire deal is going to be more stable. So it's like nothing's changed, right? There's no change in the social dynamic and the political dynamic and the power dynamic and the military dynamic of Lebanon after what Israel did. And all we have to think about is the ceasefire that's going to be overseen by the Biden administration and by Macron, who no longer has a government, and the UN, right? And everything will be fantastic. So that's really getting to the heart of it, is that the IDF general staff has been under this delusion that all you really have to do, that first of all, that strongmen are great, and that we like them, and that they're going to be in charge forever, and that the Arab world is completely static. The cross currents inside of the cultures of these countries is totally irrelevant to our discourse. We only have to think about the strongest person there. So in Egypt, they missed the rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, or the implications of the Muslim Brotherhood being the most powerful social force in Egypt for generations before they finally ousted Mubarak from power, because they talked every day to the head of his intelligence directorate, Omar Suleiman, and Omar Suleiman kept telling them that everything was great, there was nothing to care about, and if Mubarak died, then he was going to be replaced either by Suleiman himself or by one of his sons. So that there was never any question inside of the general staff of the army about the stability of the Mubarak regime. Even though anybody who read the press, read the translations of the Egyptian media on memory, for instance, totally knew that he was not stable and that the Muslim Brotherhood was poised to seize control over Egypt at a minimum after the death of Hosni Mubarak, who was old and ailing when the Arab Spring began in 2010, 2011, and overthrew him, I think, in 2012. And he was replaced by the Muslim Brotherhood. So if you had been listening to what they themselves were saying, then you wouldn't have been surprised by it. But if you're only listening to what the leadership is saying, then you're very surprised by it. And it's the same concept in all of these countries. If you're talking to the head of intelligence in Jordan and he's saying everything's fine or whatever, we're really mad that Jews are praying at the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and it's, you're bad, then you believe what he says. You don't realize that this is regime propaganda and that all of this is also trying to placate restive minorities and competitors for power inside of Jordan. And in Lebanon, obviously, Hezbollah, it's deterred, it's fine, everything's fine. We just have to appease it and everything will be fine. Let's appease it. Let's let it, attack us from time to time, and we're not going to respond because we don't want to go to war with them because they're too powerful. Right. So everywhere you see the same kind of either small thinking, total and utter lack of curiosity, let alone understanding of the regime's relationship to the populations that they tyrannize, that they repress in their own countries, or what the implications are for this, decades-long repression of the various streams of a multi-ethnic, multi-confessional population in Syria, in Lebanon, and even in Jordan, and even in Egypt. So when we're looking at that kind of lack of curiosity, I mean, it's directed by the United States, which, as we saw in the mishandling of the wars in both Iraq and in Afghanistan, they were guided by people who had no ability, apparently, to understand the importance of knowing about the society that you're invading before you actually go in, or try to, engineer it, socially engineer it into American liberal Democrats. So it's the same kind of pompous attitude towards the peoples of the region that guide your thinking when you're thinking about enemy populations, and that end up getting you into a world of trouble, particularly on October 7th, but not only. So that's what we're looking at here. It's the same kind of blindness on the part of Israel's national general staff, the Shin Bet, the Mossad, that they simply cannot understand the region. And part of that also, I think it goes back to something that I'm going to be talking a lot about this week, which is the same general staff, the Mossad, well, less the Mossad, but certainly the Shin Bet, and the IDF general staff, together with the legal fraternity in Israel's joint effort to overthrow the government through a legal coup that's based on information, whether real or fabricated, that is being provided against nodes of the government or people who are supportive of the government inside of the police, inside of the IDF, inside specifically the intelligence services, to try to prevent the government from governing, from leading the war, to oust Netanyahu from power, to protect the generals who are responsible for October 7th from ever having to be culpable for their derelictions of duties. I wrote a very long article about it. It's not that long, but I mean, it's long, whatever. On Friday in JNS, you should read it. It's called something like The Coup in the Shadow of October 7th. And it's important. You should read it. But so we'll be talking about that there as well. But basically, it the same sort of sanctimonious way that they look at the Israeli people and think that they're the ones who should lead because they have noblesse oblige, and, the rest of us are a bunch of baboons, and Netanyahu is illegitimate. That same kind of thinking informs their understanding, or really misunderstanding, of the enemies and of our neighbors, of the Palestinian Authority, which is a terrorist organization, right, that operates in conjunction with Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Iran against Israel. Right? They don't want to see that. They want to believe that there's a strong arm in the Palestinian Authority that they can work with. Why? Because same thing in Syria, same thing in Lebanon, same thing in Egypt, same thing in Jordan. They just like to believe it, just like they're supposed to be the strong man that's going to take care of business in Israel, and you don't have to listen to the riffraff, which is the Israeli people. So too, you don't have to think about what's happening in Lebanon or anywhere else, or in Syria. And by the way, it informs the same kind of, in a way, malicious but certain pompous view of themselves and the world around them, informs their lack of curiosity, their total misunderstanding of American society, and the reason why they don't understand the importance of Trump and Trumpism. Because they can't, because it's sort of beyond the ken of somebody who thinks that their privilege gives them the right to always rule their own country. So if they feel that way about their own country, then obviously they're going to feel about their neighbors who are, not Democrats, supposedly, like they are, or liberal or anything else, that they're going to think the same thing there. But they're not going to understand the illiberal cross currents inside of these regimes either. They're not going to understand anything because, just like they don't want to listen to their countrymen, they don't listen to anybody else because they know everything. They're the perfect foils for everything because they don't have that curiosity as people who are mainly concerned about maintaining their grip on power and their monopoly on discerning what's going on, national security and intelligence, et cetera. That's the main thing that drives their analysis of the situation. So that's what we're seeing there. And obviously, now that we're looking at an earthquake in the region, and an earthquake in the sense that fault lines have shifted and the plates have shifted and the way that things operate in the region have shifted, we are in a post-Sykes-Picot Middle East, where we're receding. First, we were imperialists under the Ottomans, and they were kind of squelching out all of these tribal identities or using them in order to maintain their imperial rule over the region. They were replaced by the minority regimes. I mean, the Turks obviously were a minority regime as well. They were replaced by other minority regimes that were installed by the British and the French to lord over the populations of the land masses that they were given control over through arbitrary border markings by Sykes and Picot. And they, too, like the Turks before them, ruled through oppression, even harsher oppression, and through collective action against Israel. And now, for the first time, really, maybe in 500 years, we're seeing something changing again. And on the one hand, you have people like Giuliani, who wants to take over all of Syria, and brain-dead CNN commentators or Israeli television commentators who think that we're going to get Syria back or that it's a desirable outcome, saying that they're going to control Syria, that there is a place called Syria, and it's going to be controlled by, this warlord or that jihadist or whatever. And what we're really seeing it's an organic development, and it's talked about a lot by Professor Moti Kedar, who I've had on this show, and I'm going to have him on again soon to talk about this more deeply. But it's the rise of the tribal identity, and we have to be able to understand it, and we have to not fight it, because this is an organic development in the region and it's going to happen. So if it doesn't happen, it won't happen because something came in, which is likely a bad actor, and repressed everybody again. So there are some tribal areas here that are natural allies for Israel, like the Druze, like the Kurds, perhaps the Christians, I'm not sure, in Syria and in Lebanon. And we should be working with these groups of people in order to give them protection so that they, in turn, serve as buffers for Israel so that we can secure our future going forward, whether in Lebanon vis-a-vis, post-Lebanon, Lebanon, post-Syria, Syria, probably post-Hashemite Jordan. I mean, maybe that's where Palestine should be. It was supposed to be there. Maybe that's where it should be. Maybe that was true. I don't know. But whatever is the case, we have to be ready to roll with these punches, looking at these people with the respect due to people who actually live right close to us, and listen to them and see what they want. Not because we want to help them necessarily, but because we have to understand them. So that's the second thing that I wanted to say. And here, we're going to need some reform of the security brass in order to get new thinking in there finally, so that people who are willing to look at people as equals or at least as humans, as opposed to peons in some sort of an imperial game that they get to control in Israel, can get in and start making decisions and analyses. And finally, I want to talk just about one last thing, which is that, so Assad committed genocide. He and his entire regime have the blood of hundreds of thousands of people on their hands. And, I think it's important to bear in mind the fact that Assad was never indicted for war crimes by the International Criminal Court. They never issued an arrest warrant against him or anybody in his regime, despite overwhelming proof that they were committing genocide, that they carried out attacks with weapons of mass destruction, with chemical weapons repeatedly on the people of Syria in their genocide against them, right? And yet they were never indicted, that no arrest warrants were ever issued against them. And why is that? Oh, because the ICC said that they have no jurisdiction because Syria isn't a signatory of the Rome Statute that is the Rome Treaty that formed the ICC. Guess who else isn't a signatory of the Rome Treaty? Oh, that's right, Israel. Right? And yet they dared to place arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and the fear is that they've also issued secret arrest warrants against our soldiers and our officers A lot of concern about that going on these days. People are forced to cancel trips abroad at the last moment because of these kinds of fears. And so I think here the takeaway lesson is that the ICC and the ICJ, the International Criminal Court, the Court of Justice, which is trying Israel based on a South African claim that Israel is carrying out genocide, and they're doing it as the proxy of Qatar and Hamas and Iran, that they're accusing Israel of genocide for doing what? For killing about 25,000 terrorists in Gaza, whereas Assad killed over 500,000 people, most of whom were civilians in his own country in Syria, and he's not being tried for genocide, right? And so what we have to take away from these atrocities is that these organizations are fundamentally corrupt and they have to be shut down. Then, we have 2 years of Republican control over both houses of Congress and Trump in the White House. We have 2 more years until the next Israeli elections, where Netanyahu, if he isn't ousted in a coup, will remain prime minister. We have to dismantle some of these organizations in the next 2 years. It's not enough to sanction them, which the Trump administration manifestly is about to do, but rather they have to be taken apart. They have to be ended. They have to be dismantled. They're corrupt, and they can't be allowed to exist anymore. They are like the Assad regime. They're repressive. They're corrupt. They sponsor terrorists against democracies, et cetera. So, obviously this is a dynamic situation. The first thing that you want to do are the sure bets. Israel already did them, attacking the borders between Lebanon and Syria, taking over a security zone in Quneitra, destroying the chemical weapons, the advancement missiles, et cetera, in Damascus. Very important. We have to now take big bets. The big bets here are to support the Druze, and they're not shaky bets. They're important bets that we can secure. They will be safe bets. The Druze, the Kurds, maybe the Christians. I don't know enough to tell you for sure. In Syria, perhaps the same in Lebanon. We have to be prepared. We have to recognize we are in a post Sykes-Picot Middle East, where people are now reverting to long repressed tribal identities, ethnic identities, and they're going to be the primary form of identity. We have to stop asking, are they good or bad, or rather whether their identities are inherently hostile or not. And based on that, their identities as they identify themselves, right? How are they for Israel? How are they for regional stability? What do they mean for us? And base our judgment on what to do going forward on that assessment, which itself has to be based on fact. So anyway, those are my thoughts today, day one of the post-Assad dynasty regime in Syria, day one of the post-Syria Levant. And we'll go forward this week. We have a lot of amazing shows coming up. We have 3 more shows, I think, this week. So watch this space, and I'll see you soon. Take care.